Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. It is December 1st, 2022. Now let's get over the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? So, big news coming from the United States and Germany today. So, the United States has signed a $1.2 billion contract with Raytheon to purchase the NASAMS air defense systems for Ukraine. So, that was confirmed by the Pentagon today. So great news again, protecting the skies. This is what Ukraine needs right now. Russia is planning another massive strike in the next coming days. It's going to happen. And Ukraine needs to have these systems set up all throughout the country to protect the the entirety of Ukraine. All the cities and all the settlements need to be protected. No Ukrainian right now is fully protected. So that's really great news. And coming from Germany too, Ukrainians are getting 7 Gepards, which are fantastic against drones. And have you guys noticed that there's way less drones, or if not at all, flying over Ukraine right now? The Shaheeds are no longer within the Russian stockpiles, in my opinion. It's pretty clear we've had many weeks without them, so I think the Russians are rearming themselves. They're probably getting either a new batch of Shahed drones or they're going to start producing the drones themselves. I think that there was news not too long ago that they would receive the blueprints to produce it themselves. So we'll see how that goes. But either way, the Gepards are really great anti-defense systems, especially for small drones and things like that. And 100,000 first aid kits, that's always going to be useful for all the soldiers on the front lines. These are necessary. Armored bridge laying vehicles, so we know what that's for. That's for Kherson. The Ukrainians will need to be able to cross either a lot of marshes or the river, or either way, anywhere in Ukraine, they're going to be useful. There's a lot of water bodies all throughout Ukraine, so these are great. 8 surface drones, 12 border vehicles, 4,000 sleeping bags, spare parts for the Mi-24 helicopter, and 30 ambulances. So I think it's more of a package for defense and protection. As you can see here, there's nothing really about tanks or offensive weapons. So this is a really defensive package coming from the United States and Germany. So really great news, and thank you again to Germany. As much as we criticized Germany in the beginning, they're really putting up the effort to help Ukraine now. So it's great to see this type of support. This was a really interesting article written by the Royal United Services Institute. And in this article, there were 5 very interesting takeaways from, the summary, basically summary of the Russian Federation's army between February to up until now, and how they've been operating, and just observations. So they were very interesting. So the number one is that the priorities of the land component for the armed forces of Russia are paramount. However, this creates suboptimal employment of other branches. We've seen that the Russians increasingly over time throughout this war have noticed that, their navy cannot do anything, their air force cannot do anything, so they've put all their focus on infantry. And so obviously this has been at the essentially salvaging. They haven't been able to use their navy and air force, and so basically all their focus is back to the infantry, and this creates obviously less investment, I should say, towards the navy, the air force, because they see them as not being useful in this war. And so this is one great takeaway. The second one is the Russian military has amalgamated combined arms formations in wartime, but lacks the strength of junior leadership to knit these units together. Again, it's this constant, like all their battalions are constantly getting destroyed. They lose a lot of manpower in all of these battalions, and they just need to find more replacements. And these replacements come with more junior soldiers, junior command leadership, as it says here, and they're unable to, put a vision to these battalions. They don't know what they're doing. We've been hearing all these phone calls between the Russian soldiers and their families, like, we don't know what we're supposed to do here. Our command just tells us to just go to the front line and take this down without any support. We don't know. We're just about to die. Like, these units have zero allegiance. They don't care. They see that they're just being used as meat. So it's a very good observation as well in terms of that. Number three, there is a culture of reinforcing failure unless orders are changed at higher levels. Again, this is from the second example. Soldiers are constantly being sent out to the same position, to take the same position with the same tactics, with no dynamic, change of plans, and just trying to find a way to change things up is not something that is part of the Russian military's playbook. And you see the command just giving the same orders over and over until, let's say, the Grand Chief Commander, either Surovikin or Putin, say, you know what, maybe we should go take Donbass instead of Kiev. And we've been seeing that. There's really not a lot of I guess, decision-making capacity being given to the actual soldiers in the front lines, given their input. Look, I don't see this would be a good, tactic to go ahead first there, but they don't get listened to, and obviously this is a culture reinforcing failure. So the fourth one is that the Russian forces are culturally vulnerable to deception because they lack the ability to rapidly fuse information. Propaganda in Russia. They're being told that they're being sent out, their best troops are on the front lines, they're going to be greatly equipped, right? And then in reality, they go to the training barracks, and then there's nothing. They're being told that they need to get tampons and other things, amongst other things, because the Russian military has nothing in their supply inventory. So, obviously they are just being lied to constantly. And this incentivizes a dishonest reporting culture where the command as well is telling one thing to their higher commanders and then thus to Putin. And the information is just all chaotic. Nothing, the real-time information is not properly being given to any of the commanders. So they think they're winning, but in reality they're losing, or they're losing a lot of men for each of the attacks. And the fifth thing is that the Russian military, their capabilities and formations are prone to fratricide, while processes for identifying friend from foe and establishing control measures are inadequate. Obviously, again, the multiple examples of the phone calls and the interviews that the Russian soldiers have had, where they indicate that they're just being shot at by their own. The artillery shooting these, shells, and then they don't even know where they're shooting at, and then they end up only hitting the Russian positions instead of the Ukrainian positions. And friendly fire, or just actually these lines of defenses made sure to keep the soldiers on the front line. So if one thinks of escaping, they'll just get shot by their own. And so all of that shows how disastrous the Russian army right now is. And the only reason why it's together is because of the massive amount of manpower that Putin has injected in the last few months to keep this army together. But they're very close to completely crumbling down. This is not how army wins. And we see, guys, this is why the Russian army will not win this war whatsoever. They will not. This is not how you win wars. All of these examples really show why this is going to be a massive failure for the Russian military and then the Russian regime. So I'm just reinforcing what I said yesterday. So some people said that this wasn't true, that this town was not taken by the Russians, but now there is visual confirmation that it has. Kurdyumivka has been taken by the Russians, and so they have taken sizable chunks of territory south of Bakhmut. Does this put the Ukrainian forces in a bad situation? Yes, it gets a little bit worse here, but it does not change the situation on the front lines. This is not critical, but we need to also report on the facts, and this happened. And so the Russians are attempting to do a little encirclement. This is what I believe. They won't be able to push all the way like this. This is way too ambitious for them. Only if they manage to get a breakthrough from Donetsk, I think they would really want to do like a mini encirclement of the Ukrainian forces like this. This is the plan, like eat up a little bit territory. But so far, it's been months and they haven't really done any of that. So this puts the Ukrainian forces in a obviously worse position because now, the Russians are much closer to Bakhmut. But and they're getting closer to the highway that feeds into Bakhmut as well, right? This is the only major road where the Ukrainians can supply all their goods into. It's this road, as you can see, that goes through Vanivske. And so they're trying to get closer to this other road here that leads into that highway. And Ukrainians still have the higher ground. You can see that there's a lot of hills here. And so the Ukrainians still have much better positioning compared to the Russians. But we cannot allow them to get across this road, because if they do, Bakhmut would be in critical mode at that position. So the Ukrainians need to keep getting higher ground here and not let the Russians push through Klishivka. So I think we're going to see a lot of Stuhna videos in the near future with the Ukrainians hitting the Russian tanks from above with Stuhna missiles. So that's that for Bakhmut. Again, in Zaporizhia, nothing really is happening. Things are quiet. I don't see anything happening here in the next near future. And on the left bank of the Dnipro River, you can see that the Ukrainian army again is still probing, seeing where the Russian bases are. The Russians have control over this bank. There have been pictures as well showcasing that the Russians are well fortified on the Novakakhovka Dam on the other side. So it's not going to be an easy crossing for the Ukrainian army. I think the Russians have had a lot of time to prepare for this, as we've been talking about it even in September, that they're reinforcing the left bank of the Dnipro River with a lot of bunkers and stuff. But it just takes one little breakthrough to just make it all collapse, in my opinion. So I think the Ukrainians are going to plan this out accordingly, like they've been doing. And we'll see the advancements in the next few weeks, most likely. And then the only last update is in Svatove, where this is not obviously real time at this point, but according to sources, the Ukrainians are very, very close to Svatove. Again, we need to see visual confirmation, but when I'm saying getting close to Svatove is they're pushing through, as you can see here, through Karmazinivka and also in Kremina, where again there's no reports on deep state, but it's just unverified information that the Ukrainians are much closer to cutting off this highway here north of Kremina. They're pushing to the forests here, and so they're trying to also do the same like the Russians are trying to do in Bakhmut, which is cutting off the highway that leads to Kremina and also that connects Kremina to Svatove. This is very important. The Ukrainians are getting close, and I'm really, really certain that by the end of this year, some big news are going to happen here in Svatove. It's just the Russians have massive military capabilities still. They have lots of soldiers on this front line. They've severely reinforced it. I think we're a little bit too ambitious as well, following the great advancements of the Ukrainian army, that this will be taken right away. But the Russians did make sure to really reinforce this entire front line because they didn't want to have another Kharkiv offensive by the Ukrainians, where really this was, as you can see here, pretty much acquired within the few days in September when the Ukrainians had their massive offensive. So the Russians do not want a repetition here. They don't want a repeat of history again. And so they're gonna, defend this until the very last man if necessary, until the last man decides to run away. And so that's it for the map update. Just a quick analysis of what's going on here. Macron, how many more excuses for Putin? That's my question for him. So he had an interview with ABC saying that negotiations with Putin is for the sake of good peace is still possible. According to him, and I'm really highlighting this point, Putin made a mistake by starting the war. I'm not sure if the people will be saying that or have been saying that for Hitler when he started World War II. At this point, I'm pretty sure nobody think it's a mistake. This is not something you can correct. He became a war criminal, an official war criminal, by starting this war. He's not made a mistake. He knew very well what he was doing, and he knew the consequences if something would go wrong. He never thought about it, but if something would go wrong, now he's labeled as a war criminal, and everybody, at least in Eastern Europe, wants his head because you don't get away from this. And being acknowledged by Macron that this was a mistake is only leaving the West very weak. It's just basically having one of the biggest allies of the European Union, one of the biggest partners of the European Union, saying, well, we should still give a chance for Putin, when this type of communication only reinforces Putin's actions, making him think, well, look, Europe is not strong. Europe doesn't seem to be allied very well. Let's continue doing what we're doing instead of just feeling the pressure, like, oh man, like I can see like all these countries are against me. Like, it's a different mentality within Putin when he sees what Macron is saying. So very frustrating to see still to this day Macron trying to give excuses to Putin. He's a war criminal and there's nothing else to it. That's all I have to say. So support for Putin's war in Russia has plunged. So these are Kremlin polls that were, I don't know which department or institution is doing that in the Kremlin, but essentially it says here that 25% of people now in Russia are in favor of keeping Moscow's troops in Ukraine, which is down 60%. So in less than essentially a couple months, you have now twice as less people in favor of this war. It was a 60% support. Now there's only 25, about 25% support. But what are they not in favor of for this war? Not in favor or of going to die in Ukraine, or they're not in favor of attacking one of the most brotherly nations before this war, which was Ukraine. And I think the answer to that question is the fact that they just don't want to die, right? When this war did not really affect every citizen in Russia, they were okay with whatever was happening. We just have to look as well with the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, how a lot of Russian people, and I would say in a grand majority scale, it seemed like it, that they were supporting this annexation. I saw a lot of people that are even pro Western, that are Russian, like they live in the West or somewhere in Europe, but they're Russian, have changed, that are from Crimea. They essentially changed their allegiances to Russia, and so this just shows that I think it's just the people in Russia are just against fighting. But when it directly impacts them, they're going to just, say, oh, we don't support this. We need to get out. They'll find ways to just run away. And the Russians need to do something about this. If they really are against this war, then complaining about it isn't going to bring them anywhere. And I've seen this narrative quite often, actually. I've seen some comments on my videos, basically telling, oh, the Russian people, it's not their fault. They'll get, imprisoned anyways. What is this going to bring to them, to go and protest or do something about it in Russia? But my question to these people that are commenting on my videos about, kind of giving an excuse for the Russian people is, who's going to do this for them? But not the Russian people. It's the Russian people's responsibility, the society within Russia, to act upon what is happening right now. It's a war that is not only affecting Ukraine but themselves as well. Their lives are being ruined by Putin. Their economic power is going down. People have to move out of Russia. Their population is dying out slowly. They're getting zero support from the state whatsoever. And all they can do is just complain. Like, who's going to do that for you? Nobody, but the Russians. And so this is what I'm trying to get into. Yes, this will involve some sacrifice, some lives taken. But what revolutions, what changes in, societies and governments and empires has been done without the sacrifice of human lives? And this is terrible to hear, but it's true. A lot of the moments in history that were reshaped were because people took action. They believed in what they believed in. And this brought on change, whether it be the American independence, the French independence from the bourgeoisie, to, a lot of revolts in history. It changed things for the better or the worst. But doing nothing about it absolutely doesn't do anything about it, So that's just my sort of little speech about the Russians need to do something. If they're against this war, whatever way it is, you need to change things. And that comes with changing Putin first, his regime. We'll see how that goes for the Russian people. And this is just two videos. The first one just, shows you a little bit of normalcy. This is in Bakhmut, and you can see that the garbage men are picking up garbage in Bakhmut. It's super noble of them. I think it's also part of them just wanting to have some normalcy. You can see the smoke in the background. I mean, it's a terrible world to be in when you know that every day there's going to be shells flying over you and you don't know if you're going to survive. It's terrible. And all these people would want just normalcy, a peace, and it just shows you that there's a lot of heroes as well in all these cities just doing their job, doing what they're told to do. And, this is also important to keep the diseases away. Garbage that stays out for too long, obviously doesn't get picked up. There's viruses and other diseases that develop in them, and that's it. You have another pandemic, even, or epidemic, I should say, within the city, which you don't want. So a huge shout out to all garbage men out in the entire world. You guys are doing great work, whether it be in Ukraine, Canada, Europe. They're very important people. And this is a sad note. It breaks my heart to see this. It's a Ukrainian soldier, leaving his family to go to the front lines, and his two kids are following him. just to see him maybe for the last time, possibly. Hopefully not, but you know, you can see like this should not have happened. This is a dad that could have spent, you know, his evenings with his kids instead of spending his evenings somewhere in Bakhmut or in Kherson or in Svatove under a war that was created by the Russian regime and supported by the Russian people, unfortunately, at this point. So that's it for it now, guys. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. If you like my channel, please subscribe to it. Leave me a comment about what you think about this article, about you know, the Russians being against the war. Always interested to see different perspectives. And thank you. I really appreciate it. I'll see you guys in the next video.